Well, it's Robot Wars time again here on Game Show Gumbo, and now I want to take a special look at robots that were okay or good, but then decided to take that massive leap into becoming legendary bots. I'm, of course, talking about ones that got better designs, better weapons, and became just better than anybody thought they had any right to be. I am, of course, talking about Glowups. And these are the top 5 Robot Wars Glowups of all time. Now, preface, I'm only doing series 1 through 7. I have not seen all of series 8 through 10. Enjoy. Number 5 comes in as a bit of necessity than just anything else. And that's why I have it at 5. And that is Herz. Now, before Herz, there was Herz, which was this nice long robot with a spike. And if you saw the top of the spike, that was the Herz essential logo that you saw on the shirts of John Reed and Dominic Parkinson at the time. And in Robot Wars, Herz didn't perform that well. It never made it out of the second round of the heats. And in Series 3 of Robot Wars, it drove itself into the pit when it looked like it could have been a contender that year. Especially since around that time, John Reed and Dominic Parkinson of Kilohertz was actually taking Kilohertz to the US to compete in BattleBots. And that kind of goes in line with the necessity. Because Kilohertz, honestly, is more of a BattleBots staple and icon than a Robot Wars staple or icon. It performed really well and I think it made the quarterfinals a couple of times, or the semifinals a couple of times in BattleBots as Kilohertz. Even when BattleBots upgraded, went in line with Robot Wars, becoming 100 kilos with the weight limit increase. But after Series 4 of Robot Wars, the curtain came down. If a robot was on BattleBots, it could not be on Robot Wars. And because Kilohertz became part of BattleBots, essentially, John Reed and Dominic Parkinson essentially created Herz. Herz debuted in Series 5 and had a decent run, meaning it didn't get past the second round of the heats again. But this time it was because Fluffy did Fluffy things and got a good hit on it, disabled its gas, and just destroyed it. But then Series 6 happened. Herz went on a tear, so to speak. Reed and Parkinson got the axe working correctly and spectacularly. It was essentially the best part of its melee. It then just crippled Chronic the Wedgehog. And most importantly, beat Panic Attack. It made it the first time where Panic Attack never made it past the heats, where it where it at least made the series semifinal 4 years in a row. And then Hertz's reign of terror continued in Series 6. Beat Spawn again, probably its worst incarnation. Beat Bigger Brother. Made the grand final. And it was just outclassed. And it was just toyed with Razor. And then it knocked itself out because it turned up the gas pressure way too high. And so it knocked itself out. Herz actually did well in Extreme 2 with the Challenge Belt, making it all the way to Tornado, but because Tornado's scoop is shaped the way it is, it just got under Herz the entire time, and that's how the cookie crumbled for that. I would have loved to seen it perform in Series 7. My theory is this. If it had competed in its heat, which was Heat B, I don't think it makes it past the first round of the semis. It had to compete against Storm 2. And Storm 2 is essentially Tornado, except more compact and faster. If Terahertz couldn't beat Tornado, it wasn't going to beat Storm 2. But Terahertz is an icon to this day. It competed in the revival of Robot Wars and did alright. Made it the Heat Final a couple of times. But I will still always love its Series 6 incarnation of Terahertz. Now, number 4 I mentioned previously, but I think the Glow-Up was bigger than its predecessor. So number 4 is Bigger Brother. Now, as Big Brother in Series 3, it was a wedge robot and it had the flail in the back. And the flail never worked too well. Because it never really did any damage, so what Ian Watts did was use it as essentially a scoop bot and was able to drive opposing robots into the house robots or into the pit. Now, the thing about Series 3 is that the pit was covered up after round 2 of the heats. So you couldn't pit anybody. So he lost a kind of controversial judge's decision. And the team was like, no, I forget who Big Brother lost to in Series 3. I think it was Facet. Somebody's going to correct me on this in the comments, and please do. Made it to the semis and didn't do anything there. So they redesigned. So Ian Watts redesigned with Little Joe, and we got Bigger Brother debuting in Series 4, which didn't do all that well because a little valve on it got dislodged in its fight with Bulldog Breed, and it couldn't self-right. It couldn't flip anymore. So came the redesign in Series 5 of the inside with the weight increase. Better armor, better flipper. Liquid CO2 in the flipper. And it became one of the most devastating bots of Series 5. Its first 2 robots that have fought, Tip Top and Splinter, chucked out of the arena in quick fashion. Tried to get 3 Stakes to Heaven out, couldn't do it. Also tried to get S3 out, couldn't do it, but still won. And then came the fight with Chaos 2. It beat Chaos 2 after Chaos 2 had gone on this long streak of wins, winning Series 3 and 4. And then making it to the grand final where it got absolutely demolished by Hypnodisc. Hypnodisc went for the pit release, but Bigger Brother scooped it and put it in the pit, which kind of solidified Hypnodisc's legacy of failure in Robot Wars. Then came Series 6, and unfortunately for Bigger Brother, after it got rebuilt, just ran up against Razor, and almost every single bot in Robot Wars is kind of susceptible to Razor. It's got to be really big in order so that Razor couldn't get its claw in. There's not many robots or great robots that it could do that to, or have a bot that's well armored that it can't pierce. Unfortunately, Bigger Brother loses. Series 6 seeded second, just plows through everybody. Plows through Behemoth, plows through Disco Inferno, runs up against Dominator 2, loses in a very close fashion, in my opinion. Then we get to the Losers Melee, where Bigger Brother and Spawn again just essentially take out Hypnodisc. And Bigger Brother goes to the Series 6 semi-final second round, and unfortunately, so much damage got taken by Bigger Brother in its fight with Dominator 2, Hypnodisc, Spawn again. Terahertz just pounded it a few times, and the power just went dead. So Bigger Brother went away. However, Bigger Brother had already cemented its legacy by going to the finals in Series 5. Series 7 was just a lucky shot by Iron On, which chucked it out. And in my opinion, if that didn't happen, and if Bigger Brother did win, I think you might be looking at a deep run by Bigger Brother. I think if it beats Iron On, it definitely beats Typhoon. Because Bigger Brother does have the armor to block its shots. It does have the flipper, the high-powered flipper, which could just chuck a Typhoon over so it couldn't self-right. I think it beats... Yeah, it beats Thermidor. But then we have the fight with Atomic. And that one's a bit more dodgy. But I think the history of Robot Wars, Sun Force, does change if Bigger Brother beats Iron Awe. But there you go. And that's the story of Bigger Brother. One of the best redesigns and best come-up stories. Number 3 is a personal favorite of mine. Like, I saw this robot in the scheme in the Third Wars, and I just fell in love with it, and that's Exterminator. Now, in the Third Wars, Exterminator was this big boxy bot with a scoop in the front and its axe. And the axe worked well for Series 3. Unfortunately, it ran up against Panic Attack in its Heat Final, and Panic Attack just... It was a great fight. Take a look at that Exterminator versus Panic Attack fight. Exterminator almost had Panic Attack, but Panic Attack was able to power through it and was able to flip Exterminator on its side where it didn't have a self-rider. So Series 4 came along, we had Exterminator 2, the second version, where it had an it's one of the first robots to have interchangeable weapons. It had its axe and it also had a flipper. The flipper performed much better than the axe, where it was able to reach the semifinals by beating Behemoth. And then it went up against Wild Thing in the semifinals, and it didn't perform too well. It just ran out of battery power. Then you have Series 5 and 6, where they kept with the axe, and it just had power problems in Series 5, where it lost its axe and it lost a corkscrew. In Series 6, the axe itself was a little bit flimsier than it should have been, because the axe blade got stuck in megahertz. And then it went up against Firestorm 4, which Simon Baldwin of the team said it would be the worst one to fight because it couldn't do anything to it. And thus, he was proven correct because he was taken out in such short order. Series 7. It goes from an axe robot to this bad boy, becoming one of the best spinners in Robot Wars history, even though it's just for one season. It caused so much damage to a lot of robots. Like, Major Tom 3 got thrashed. Diabolus just got demolished. And both of those bots, Tsunami just chucked them out. Exterminator did all of the damage. Then you had Killer Carrot's fight, and it just became Grated Carrot. And became the first vertical spinner in UK Robot Wars history as a contestant to chuck another robot out of the arena. That is a total glow up from that type of bot. I mean, you had powerful vertical spinners like 259, Vader, IG-88, and a few other, S3, and none of them could chuck a robot out of the arena, but Exterminator did. And then came one of the best fights in Robot Wars history against Tsunami. It was a real back and forth battle. Everybody, when they saw that fight near the beginning, thought Tsunami was going to beat Exterminator when it flipped Exterminator and it was kind of pinned against the sidewall. Exterminator got flipped, but it landed on its wheels, and it just thrashed Tsunami, which I think Tsunami could have gotten far, in the wars, but I don't know how far. Probably the second round of the series semifinal. Probably lose to Bulldog Breed. Then comes the series semifinals, where it just thrashes St. Aggro, and we see the power of its spinner, because it flayed St. Aggro's flipper. And when it comes to a flipper, it's got to have that low point to where it can actually get under robots. With Exterminator's blade, it bent up, so it couldn't get under a robot. So essentially making the flipper useless. St. Aggro's got a double-sided flipper, so it still had that other side, but it never got flipped to that other side. And then once Exterminator did a couple of attacks on it, it was just dead. And then Bulldog Breed's fight. And it goes to the control of Marlon Pritchard, where he always knew to keep Exterminator facing toward the flipper of its opponent, because he knew his scoop at the front could go under almost any flipper. And especially with Bulldog Breed's flipper, where it bent it up, meaning the flipper was useless. And the devastation of that fight was just incredible. Marlon Pritchard said he probably went too far in that fight, and immediately apologized to the Bulldog Breed team afterwards. Although it got defeated quite handily by Typhoon and then Tornado, because there was just so much damage against its fight with Typhoon that it got 4th place. And that is probably one of the best glow-ups in Robot Wars history. I mean, a robot that was a good axe bot becomes one of the best spinners in the original Wars. And I would have loved to seen Exterminator in the revival, or maybe in another Robot Wars competition after Robot Wars ended. But at least I know I could take solace in the fact that Exterminator still exists, Marlon Pritchard still has it, he demonstrated that it still works. And here's hoping he can bring it back to life one day. With number 2, I have to go with Chaos 2. Now, if you take a look at its first incarnation of Chaos in the Second Wars, he had George Francis had Robot the Bruce in the first Wars, and then we had Chaos in the Second Wars. It was a good flipper robot. Now, the problem that Chaos had was that its flipper was designed quite poorly. And he recognized this, because he fought another lifter flipper bot, I forget who it is, but he got tilted up and the flipper got stuck, so he couldn't self-right. So he took that, and also with a nice little bit of inspiration from Cassius, we got Chaos 2 in Series 3, where it just became the best flipper in Robot Wars history, or one of the best flippers in Robot Wars history. It certainly is the grand master of the flipper. Because he put liquid CO2 in his flipper, he was able to get a lot of power out of the flipper, which essentially just beat everything in its path. Especially when George Francis became the first robot to throw another robot out of the arena. That robot would be Firestorm, the original incarnation of Firestorm, which is also another flipper. And then flipped over Hypnodisc, and this was before Hypnodisc had a self-rider, and Chaos 2 became one of the only 2 bots to win the championship in the original series by knockout. Because Series 1, Roadblock won on a judge's decision against, I want to say, Recyclops. Series 2, Panic Attack pitted Cassius. Series 4, Chaos 2 runs the table and beats Pussycat by decision. Series 5, Razor beats Bigger Brother by decision. Tornado beats Razor in a decision in Series 6. Series 7, Typhoon beats Storm 2 in one of the most controversial decisions in Robot Wars history. But the thing about Chaos 2 and why I can't put Chaos 2 at number 1 is that while other robots improved, previous Robot Wars robots that I talked about earlier, Herz in Series 5 improved. Bigger Brother improved. Exterminator definitely improved. Chaos 2 essentially stood still. It never improved after Series 4, and you can see its decline greatly. What happened is George Francis simply said lack of time, effort, and money, and it was true because he became a backstage part of the show. He would help out other teams that were having mechanical problems. You could see this in Extreme 2 with the Second Annihilator, where we'd help out Disco Inferno with their bot, and found it to be quite puzzling. And he got paid for doing all of that stuff. And unfortunately, the robot Chaos 2 suffered for it. It didn't make the final 8 in Series 5, and then Bigger Brother upset it because he knew that George didn't have a lot of gas. So he held back on his gas, thinking Chaos 2 would run out, and that's exactly what happened. Series 6, I'm of the mind he shouldn't have made it past the second round of its heat, and he probably wouldn't have if the Crush Station team didn't pit itself. But then, essentially what was the 2 retirement matches was Chaos 2 against Dantomkia. After flipping out so many robots out of the arena, Dantomkia flips Chaos 2 out. And then in the Extreme 2 All-Stars, 13 Black essentially retires Chaos 2 by just immobilizing it with a couple of shots. In the pantheon of Robot Wars, Chaos 2 is the only 2-time champion. Well, on the televised version of Robot Wars, it's the only 2-time champion. And it is one of the best bots of all time. Top 3 especially, but maybe top 2 are the best of all time. But in good consciousness, because of its immense drop-off, I couldn't put it number 1. When I say glow-ups, I'm talking about going from something to becoming one of the most feared bots of all time. I'm cheating with this one, I admit, but I can't. There's just no other way to describe how a bot goes from essentially being the punching bag to being one of the most feared bots ever. And it's the matriarch herself, Matilda. Now, when Matilda was first built, it had the chainsaw tail. And in early Robot Wars, when it was a bit touch and go with the quality of the bots, the chainsaw, which could cut through metal, did quite a bit of damage. However, when the series, like around Series 3, Series 4, the chainsaw really wasn't cutting it. Figuratively and literally. And Matilda would always be the robot that got flipped. Which, around that time, nobody flipped Shunt, nobody flipped Bash, nobody flipped Dead Metal, nobody could definitely flip Kit-A-Lot, but they always flipped Matilda. And then came the Southern Annihilator in Series 4. When after Razor beat Onslaught, Razor essentially murdered Matilda by crushing its exterior, and essentially at the end, Matilda was rest in pieces. But then Extreme happened with the weight increase, which doesn't work with the house robots because they could be as big as they want. Matilda got the flywheel tail. And if you want to talk about the most destructive house robot weapons, nothing compares to Matilda's massive flywheel. I mean, anytime a robot got close to it, it got destroyed without a thought. Just look at any bot that Matilda got its tail on, and it did immense damage. Behemoth got stuck with the tail and almost pretty much had its scoop taken out. And then became Extreme 2. I'm jumping in the timeline. Matilda got its flipper tusks. So you had the flywheel tail. Now you got flipper. It's got the two of the most powerful and effective weapons in Robot Wars. It's got a flipper in the front. It's got the flywheel tail on the back. It could do everything. And did. In Extreme 2, it became the first UK robot, out of all of them, to use her flywheel to boot somebody out of the arena. She did it with Sir Chrome a lot, and then would do it with Vader. And anytime Matilda's flywheel got close or did any type of damage, there was a lot you had to do to that robot in order to get it fixed. Going back to Exterminator, in its final fight with Tornado, Matilda did about 2,000 pounds worth of damage, and this is according to Marlon Pritchard. With the immense change that happened to Matilda, and it becoming the most feared house robot, maybe always apart from Sir Kilowat's fear is always going to be, it's big, it's huge, and it's Lance. And it's Crusher. But with Matilda, it could do severe damage to a bot. And there's just no way to stop it. And thus, Matilda is the best glow-up in Robot Wars history. And I'd like to thank everybody for watching this Robot Wars video. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment what you think, what other bots you think had the best glow-up in the series. Also give me some suggestions on the revival bots that had the best glow-up. I know that Iron-All had a decent glow-up with Iron-All 6. Also, leave your comments about what other Robot Wars subjects you want me to talk about. And just like, subscribe, comment the video. And if you want to help fund a couple more Robot Wars videos, become a Patreon backer at patreon.com/GameShowGumbo. I'm Cindy Saddleman. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.